Cowboy Bebop is a show I've clearly never seen before, and even if I had seen it, I probably would hate it, judging by me just liking only really terrible things in entertainment. Okay, so if you know me in real life, then I don't even need to say that the original Cowboy Bebop anime series is perhaps my favorite piece of entertainment ever created. I'm not even joking. Believe it or not, this show is actually partially responsible for my love of film. It kind of got me into wanting to pursue filmmaking. And yeah, not only is this an essential anime classic, but I consider it to be essential cinema. I have watched this original series countless times. Like, I know most of the episodes word for word, and I can also say the same for the Cowboy Bebop movie, Knocking on Heaven's Door. And while this movie came out all the way back in 2001, they recently did a theatrical re-release for this anime cinema nights that they're doing. And of course, being the Cowboy Bebop super fan that I happen to be, I had to go, and this was actually my second time seeing the Bebop movie in theaters. Despite the fact that the film was made years after the series had finished, it actually takes place right after episode 22. Though the chronology of it doesn't matter that much, it just takes place at some point before the end of the series. It's actually a fully standalone adventure similar to most episodes of the show, and it follows the bounty hunter crew, Spike Spiegel, Faye Valentine, Jet Black, Ed, and the Welsh corgi Ein, of course, as they pursue the culprit of this tanker truck explosion that caused this super intense virus to spread. A plot that's a little more relatable post-2020. Oh, fucking Christ. My light fell over there and I had to reset it up. I don't know how different this looks, but yeah, welcome to my new set, guys. I think the first half of this movie sort of feels like a somewhat mid-tier episode of the Cowboy Bebop series, which by Bebop standards, a mid-tier episode is still great, so I'm still really loving most of this movie. We kind of just follow the group as they go on their separate paths, trying to solve this mystery of who this person is. That way they can get this super massive bounty. And yeah, that's one of the things I really adore about both the Cowboy Bebop show and the movie, is that these characters are just broke and starving all the time. They don't really care about helping people or saving anything. Really, their main goal here is to get money so they can fucking eat and live. It's a show about adulting. While the first half of this movie seems somewhat unnecessary, like it's not a mandatory watch, the second half definitely gets a lot more dramatic and goes to some pretty intense places that you would hope a Cowboy Bebop movie would go. I think in the end it earns its feature runtime. That being said, I don't think it accomplishes it perfectly. You can see there's not a natural transition into doing a 2-hour long runtime as opposed to half-hour episodes, because the pacing here is completely uneven, honestly. However, even if not every scene is super essential to the plot and there happen to be a lot of scenes of just characters spouting exposition, luckily, not only are the characters here really great, but just the visuals and Shinichiro Watanabe's direction across the board is always incredible to watch and kind of makes what would be a really standard scene on the page just be something that's super entertaining. Even though I loved this movie as a kid and watched it countless times growing up, there were definitely some stretches of the film that bored me, whereas now as an adult, I really love art house movies a lot, and there are elements of the slower scenes in this movie that echo an art film of sorts. So I guess for me, this movie has actually kind of improved the older I've gotten. As far as major criticisms with the film goes, I think Jet has nothing to do in this plot. In fact, there's a large chunk of the movie where it's focusing so much on the other characters, and then when it cuts back to Jet on the Bebop, he's just sitting around thinking, man, I wonder when those guys are gonna come back. And Jet is one of my favorite characters in the show, so to me it's a little unfortunate that he didn't really get a major thing to do. He has like maybe one plot contribution here. I'm also not thrilled about the treatment of Faye in the film. And I think a lot of this just has to do with the fact that this movie came out in 2001, and you know, it goes without saying that anime has a bad history of overly sexualizing women. I do not even need to tell you that. And while I like that the villain of this movie, Vincent, is able to overpower Faye because it kind of puts Faye in this position that we haven't seen her before, therefore making Vincent a more intimidating villain overall, I don't think they had to go with this pseudo-sexualized rapey vibe that they went with in the movie. I don't mind her being captured necessarily, but yeah, just I'm not crazy about the sexual assault stuff. And that's not to say that I'm sensitive to that topic when it comes to entertainment. I love a lot of fucked up movies. If you've seen some of my older videos, you saw that I had an Irreversible poster in my background, and that is maybe my favorite movie of all time, so that should just go to show that I don't really care if like a story needs to go to that place. I just don't think it was necessarily warranted in this movie. and it kind of just seems to be there so we get some sexualized shots of Faye. That being said, Faye does still have some badass moments in the movie for sure, and I think that she has a stronger presence than Jet in the film. And while the character Ed doesn't have a ton to do in this movie either, in fact she really just has one standout scene, I don't think that's entirely different than her presence in the show. She was always just kind of a background character that helped out the plot every now and then, aside from her one major episode, Mushroom Samba, which I and almost everyone else loves. Spike's role in this movie kind of reminds me a lot of Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark. He doesn't directly affect a lot of the plot. He's just kind of along for the ride, and he's kind of like the audience surrogate character. We kind of follow him as he learns information, and we learn the information as well. And I don't even think that's necessarily an issue. He definitely gets pushed to some dramatic places. And I'd say out of all the Bebop characters, he's definitely the one you would want to have in that space, since he is mostly the protagonist of the series. Of the new characters, I really love Elektra. I think her design is super badass, and she just has this really strong, memorable presence. She's a delight to watch every time I see this movie. Her introduction scene where she fights Spike is just so iconic. And yes, Spike, I too love the kind of woman who can kick my ass. Although, weird question about Elektra's character, and it doesn't even have to do with the script necessarily, but I see her name listed as Elektra Ovila in most places, although in the English dub of the Cowboy Bebop movie, they call her Elektra Oviroa, which is a much cooler sounding name. I'm just unsure what the difference is exactly there. I just see literally no one ever talking about that, so I just wanted to bring it up. I don't have any insight on the matter, just curious. This film also introduces the character of Vincent Villaju, who is the antagonist of the film. Aside from their names being very similar, I think Vincent has a lot in common with Vicious from the Cowboy Bebop show. Neither hold a ton of dimension and are really just there to be intimidating forces of nature, which I think mostly works. In fact, I think Vincent actually holds a little bit more development than Vicious did in the show. That being said, Vicious just has such a striking, iconic design, and his presence is so unforgettable in that show. So seeing a very similar character just kind of placed into the Bebop movie is definitely a little more forgettable. I'm not saying that Vincent is a bad character, but I wasn't really sold on him until we start seeing him do some really crazy shit later on. While I think his character is mostly just meant to provide a lot of thought-provoking philosophical questions for the audience to ask, I still struggle a little bit with his motivation. All of that being said, he services this movie essentially perfect. And even though I do have criticisms with Cowboy Bebop the movie, I think that it gives you exactly what you would want from a Cowboy Bebop feature film. It's kind of lazy for me to say that the music has an amazing presence in the film, but it does, and that definitely needed to carry over from the show. Even if one or two of the tracks may or may not have been plagiarized. Damn that Yoko Kanno. But I think where this film really ups the ante is with the action, and you would want that from a feature version of Bebop. I actually think the third act of this movie, that final hand-to-hand combat scene between Spike and Vincent, is maybe the best fight scene ever put to animation. I'm dead serious. It is actually incredible and astounding to watch in a theater, and even to just watch at home on your TV. So while this movie does have uneven pacing for sure, and I think they definitely could have trimmed some of the fat and made it a lot tighter, I still absolutely adore the experience of watching that, and I acknowledge fully that I am biased on that. One day I would love to make a video describing my history with the Cowboy Bebop series, but I'll just say that I've been a super fan since I was like 13 years old, and that show means more to me than I think like almost any piece of art, as pretentious as that sounds. But yeah, Cowboy Bebop changed my life forever. So while this film is not quite as perfect as some of the greatest points of the series, it still holds an extremely special place in my heart, and I still love it with essentially everything in me. Which is why, despite its flaws, I'm actually gonna give Cowboy Bebop the movie a strong 8 out of 10.